Life is funny, in a way. Sometimes you focus on career, knowledge, learning about the world and how it works. And despite a few curveballs, you end up feeling you have a pretty good idea of how stuff goes. And then you approach a site of interest on behalf of your employers and a literal Greek god leaps out to welcome you. That stuff does something to you, man. He said we would know him as Hermes, and congratulated us on finding our way back to them. I was like, alright, let's go. I wasn't the best person to be sent there. He showed me this place, or as we've taken to calling it, realm, named Olympus, which is in fact partially contained at higher dimensions, which we have been able to study indirectly thanks to interactions with matter and energy we can detect using our own equipment. This realm partially overlaps with our own, in a way we couldn't perceive until we began studying accumulations of omega particles on various points of our planet, in this case atop the mountain known as Mount Olympus, the name of the realm and the mountain being undeniably intertwined since antiquity. These omega accumulations constitute a series of points where beings from our dimension can perceive this other realm, at least to a degree. While we have full reason to believe the environment present within this realm is too alien to be properly defined in ecological or even biological terms, at least according to our readings, it would seem immediate visual and tactile perception of this place is filtered through our own senses and experience, as if watching mere shadows projected on a cave's wall, to the point that what our readings indicate is a massive, multi-tiered and moving structure will seem to an observer as a simple, if large, olive tree. Thus, while the higher concentration of omega particles creates a link between the two realms, and mortals can perceive it as overlapping their own, as a reflection or mirage, they cannot interact with it in a meaningful way. Humans would still be traveling their own physical planet, but seeing the other, running the risk of falling to their death or being hurt by invisible threats. We were lucky to have a guide accompany us in this journey, which allowed us to avoid these issues altogether. These organisms and their environment are, in a way, similar to the organism known as Zarathos, being massive, barely visible concentrations of physical matter that hold a series of electromagnetic fields. These matter concentrations and corresponding electromagnetic fields are arranged in a series of clusters, which act as their organs. A big component of their biology is the presence of omega particles, which cause passive decay of matter into its constituting elemental particles, producing small quantities of energy in the process, all of which can be held inside said EM fields and used at will to affect matter according to their needs. Despite these apparent similarities, Olympians vary widely in size and composition, as do the applications and extent of their capabilities, yet they seem to form a single, mostly cohesive group of organisms. See, despite their noticeable differences, which would be enough to classify them as different species if following the taxonomical rules we are familiar with, these organisms seem to be part of a single species, being fully capable of interbreeding with each other and even interacting in a manner more similar to a society than an ecosystem. However, as we may see at a later date, the interbreeding criteria may not be as applicable to these species as it is to those we are more familiar with. When dealing with humans, the Olympians have proven able to somewhat condense their matter, or a portion of it, into an approximation of the human form, which is done both for our convenience and theirs, allowing us to perceive them and them to interact with our realm. As they do this, the physical components of their electromagnetic system will be condensed into a material that is dense enough to accommodate for the original mass, conductive, and inert. Gold. This gold is present all throughout their bodies, flowing inside them in a colloidal suspension analogous to blood, which the mortals called ichor. This ichor allows them to retain an approximation of their abilities, even if they pale before the full extent of their abilities in their native forms. As we've mentioned in the past, controlled use of omega particles and of the elemental particles they produce from matter allow organisms to change the composition and properties of matter around them. And Olympians are prime examples of the extent to which these physical properties can be used. What better example to begin with than Zeus, mightiest of the Olympians? This particular entity seems to be the vastest and most powerful among them. While a king by title, one could argue his position is more akin to that of a chieftain due to the differences in their organization and population numbers. Oh, how mature. Really. Anyway, Zeus is known for being the king of the skies. There, I said it, king. And using lightning as a weapon, which could very reasonably be a result of the vast mass that composes him holding an equally large amount of electromagnetic fields. However, his size alone does not account for this difference in power compared to even his closest relatives, given the calculations by our staff. If some of these historic records are correct, it seems at some point Zeus received a large amount of extremely rare, very dense metals, which he incorporated into his own mass. This strengthened his electromagnetic field generating clusters, and the purposeful interactions between these, as well as the conductivity produced by these materials, allow Zeus to produce large amounts of electricity that he will use both offensively and as a way to alter matter around himself. It is no wonder there were no challengers to his throne given this disparity. Following on this, we will meet another high-ranking Olympian, Poseidon, who is, according to the records, the brother of Zeus. Poseidon uses his power to move matter by altering the charge of its target and that of his own EM fields, as well as expelling particles to make it heavier or lighter. In his case, Poseidon specialized on matter in the liquid state, particularly the water of the seas, given its high conductivity compared to other naturally occurring liquids, allowing this Olympian to control it at a much greater scale and much more dramatically. However, his abilities extend to a variety of materials, the most impressive of which is the molten rock found deep beneath the earth. By manipulating it, Poseidon can create earthquakes at will. As a particular note, Poseidon seems to have become rather fond of horses in our realm. Maybe these entities have favorite animals as much as we do, and Poseidon's is whatever the equivalent of horses is in the Olympian realm. Another figure of interest is Hephaestus, who is capable of, in opposition to Poseidon, manipulating fire by exchanging energy between matter, producing heat and inducing the ignition of flammable materials, in a manner rather similar to Zarathos. Due to these abilities, it seems Hephaestus would often reside within volcanoes, experimenting with the properties of heat and matter, particularly of metals, thus inspiring mortals themselves to experiment and develop their technology and science. This researcher hypothesizes he and Poseidon might not get along well. Other gods would have a much more subtle effect on the world around them, using their abilities not to turn the forces of nature to their will, but to turn the minds of humanity. Our guide claims this was never done against our will, and never in a way we would have opposed. As with most things pertaining to gods, we've chosen to believe them for the sake of our peace of mind. Regarding specific gods, none is a greater example of this than Athena, goddess of wisdom. She would create a mental interface with mortals, being able to interpret the blood flow in our brains as thoughts, and being able to change it at will, as well as altering the connections between our neurons. This would effectively improve the synaptic activity rates and efficiency, thus increasing the mental capabilities of the mortal she linked with. Hermes, another god, would interface with humans in a similar way, helping align and organize the ideas of mortals to give them greater eloquence and improving their ability to communicate their thoughts. Some gods, however, were not quite as careful of the impact they had on mortals. What better example can we provide of this than Aphrodite, she who would inspire love and desire? Given the lack of understanding these entities have on human relations, and all aspects of life that are affected by them, these favors would often backfire, most usually in a very catastrophic manner. Dionysus, a latecomer to the relations between gods and mortals, would form mental interfaces to inspire a sense of freedom and reprieve, contrasting with what he interpreted as a rigid rule of both gods and men. He would inspire the arts, dance, and party, but would just as often bring madness to the minds of mortals, who saw their senses and minds altered beyond what they could comprehend. Finally, we will refer to Apollo, who would aid humans in their search for truth. By directly giving humans information of things beyond their mortal senses, as well as aiding them through the mental interface to let them know how they could influence each other as they came into contact, he would effectively give mortals the gift of prophecy. Tales abound about how prophecy would become a thorn in the side of many a mortal. Alas, as fascinating a subject as this is, we could keep going on about it for far too long. More research is still underway, so we may return at a later date with further findings. There is still a lot we haven't discussed about the Olympians and their relationship with mankind, so let us finish for now and return again for something else later on. So that's it for Speculative Biology look into the Greek gods. And first of all, to anyone out there thinking these aren't gods but very powerful aliens, then buckle up, cause I'm about to learn ya something good. Across mythology, many gods are considered to have lived in planes or places beyond our own realm, which makes them aliens in the very literal sense that they come from elsewhere. In many of these myths, gods even created Earth, meaning they were not born there, thus reinforcing their alien identity. Just because something can be described as an alien, it doesn't mean it can't also be a god. Both just define different aspects of them. Now that my ramblings are over, you'll notice we didn't cover every single Greek god out there, nor every aspect of them. That is because this episode was turning out quite long, so I decided to divide it into two to allow me to give each part more time. So with all of that out of the way, please tell me if you enjoyed this episode. I do plan on bringing more pantheons with their own variations and concepts, so please feel free to tell me what you'd like to see. Here's a thank you to everyone who has asked to see an episode on Greek gods or gods as a whole. And also a big thank you to our researchers and research associates who support us through Patreon and YouTube memberships, and who really helped me in turning this crazy concept into a reality. Remember, you too can join in if you want to support our channel, and you get some nice perks too, like seeing all of our creatures and videos ahead of time and helping mold them into shape. Or you can also like, subscribe, or write a comment telling me any type of creature you would like me to give the Spec Evo treatment in the show. Any of those really help the channel a lot. Thank you all for watching, And see you next time on the Speculative Wildlife Research Center.